I wear a lot of old clothes these days. Now there are some things that you should definitely buy new, but there's also a lot of things that you should buy secondhand or vintage, in my opinion anyway. If you followed my channel for a while, you may have noticed that I've been incorporating more and more vintage clothing into my rotation over the years. And there's a few very good reasons for that have really benefited me and I think will benefit you as well. So I'm going to talk through what those are today, and I'll also leave links to everything I'm wearing down in the description box below, or at least something very similar. Unique styles that you won't find again. Probably one of the biggest reasons to go vintage is the unique styles you'll find. A seemingly infinite amount of clothing has been produced over the last 50 years or so, and with that comes every type of design you can think of. Different colours, patterns, band tees, graphic tees, things you didn't know existed, and indeed things you didn't realise you needed until you saw them. And 99% of the time, a vintage piece that you're looking at is going to be the only one of its kind. I went to an event the other day and two people showed up wearing the exact same thing that they'd bought from the same high street store. And I know it sounds bad, but there was definitely a weird vibe in the room as everyone started to realise that they were wearing exactly the same thing. When buying vintage, you can be almost certain that it's unique and no one else is going to be wearing it, which could potentially save you some awkwardness. Vintage clothes always get compliments as well because people haven't seen them before and want to strike up a conversation to know where they're from. Also, due to the broad range of designs that are available, you can really hone in on the things that fit your niche tastes and help you to define your personal style. Natural distressing and aging. Next up, if you love the look of worn-in clothing, then you really need to go vintage. I don't know why, but clothes that have a bit of wear have always appealed to me way more than something new and crispy. This French chore jacket is a recent example of something that I've picked up and is really worn in. It's probably from the 60s or 70s, and the natural distressing is beautiful. The moleskin fabric probably started off as a really vibrant blue, but over time has faded into this almost silvery colour with a blue tinge. When I compare my jacket with a brand new one, I'd choose my old one any day just based on the colour alone. The age of it also means that the fabric has become really soft rather than stiff as it would have been when it was first made. In addition to all this, it has subtle distressing and rips from years of natural wear. This piece has a real feeling of history to it. Much like an old house, it feels like it's been loved and relied upon, and that makes me appreciate it so much more. A lot of brands try to mimic this vintage style and will charge you a pretty penny for it. But in my eyes, what's the point when you can just get a genuine one for a lot cheaper? It's usually cheaper. Now, following on from that last point, yes, buying vintage can often be a lot cheaper. I can't think of a better example of this than Levi's jeans. A brand new pair of Levi's 501s will run you a minimum of £90 here in the UK, unless you find them on sale somewhere. However, go to absolutely any vintage store, charity shop, thrift shop, and you'll find endless amounts of vintage 501s for sale at a fraction of the price. Okay, not every single one is going to be a made in USA, Big E salvage denim pair, but maybe you just want a pair of modern Levi's anyway. You can find basically new pairs second hand, and they're going to be so much more affordable. Of course, you could go properly vintage and find some nicely worn in and distressed pairs if you want, and that's where vintage shopping gets really fun in my opinion. But yeah, before buying anything new, check eBay, Vinted or Depop to see if a vintage or second hand version exists, and potentially save yourself a wad of cash. Except no imitations. The next one is huge for me, just like the M&M advert said, except no imitations. I'm all about purchasing the original version of something if possible, or as close as I can get. I'm not saying modern reproductions are bad by any stretch of the imagination. However, if I can, I will always want to buy the OG version of something. For example, the vintage t-shirts I have from the 60s and 70s. I really wanted that genuine fit, construction and feel of t-shirts that you can only get from that era. They're a bit more form-fitting, shorter in length and have much sturdier collars. They also have niche details like colour, design and types of screen printing that are hard to find these days. Of course, like I said, there are some excellent modern reproductions of things as well. Like my Buzz Rickson's jacket, which is a perfect replica of the original MA1 jacket. You can find a few brands who painstakingly reproduce things that are historically accurate. So those are the next best thing if you can't get the original, but if I could, I definitely would have loved to get a genuine vintage MA1 jacket. Much better fit. I've touched upon this in a few of my other points, but for me, a massive attraction to vintage clothing is the fit. A lot of modern clothes are made with a very modern cut, for lack of a better term. By that I mean they're a bit too long in length, the sleeves are weird shapes, and the cut is somewhere between fitted and loose. Basically, I think they're trying to cater to too many people at the same time, and in doing so have made their clothes fit a little bit poor for everyone. I find with a lot of vintage clothes, the fit is very defined and to the point. My favourite example of this are vintage Carhartt Detroit jackets. I have some here which date from the 90s to the early 2000s, but you can find some that date all the way back to the 80s. They're short in length and roomy across the chest and arms. These were made to be work jackets, and so that explains why they fit this way. But that's the whole reason why I and many others love them. They were made with a purpose in mind, which gives them a very distinctive look that also happens to be very aesthetic in today's fashion world. And I feel like a lot of older clothing was made with a very clear purpose like this, which resulted in them having fantastic fits. A lot of modern clothes are just made to be a means to an end, just something to cover your body. This makes them look quite basic and boring in my opinion. Obviously there's plenty of brands out there that are focused on fit and silhouette, but if you want something really special, it's always worth looking for vintage. Better quality. Next up, without a doubt, a lot of the vintage clothing you're going to buy is going to be of better quality than modern versions. Standards just seem to be a lot higher back then, or more likely, manufacturers hadn't found cheaper ways to mass produce clothes to the extent they do today. Again, I'm not talking about all modern clothes, but a lot of them seem to be produced to the minimum standard and cheapest price point in order to increase profits. This results in lesser quality materials and construction, leading to poor durability and fit. For example, I look at my vintage Woolrich and Pendleton shirts which date from the 70s or 80s and cannot believe the level of quality. They're made in the USA from 100% thick virgin wool, and the fact that they're still fully intact today is a testament to their build quality. To get something of equivalent quality brand new today would cost you in the region of hundreds of pounds or dollars. And I'm not wholly convinced that they would last 40 or 50 years like these older shirts have. And by the way, these vintage shirts can be picked up for a bargain. Part of the quality aspect probably comes back to that fact that a lot of older clothes were produced with a purpose. These shirts were likely worn by workers, and so they needed to be durable and tough. But that's all the more reason to buy vintage, knowing you're getting something that was built to last. Less wasteful. Last up, you probably saw it coming, but it needs to be said. Buying old, second-hand or vintage clothing has a lower impact on the environment than buying new. I'm certainly not trying to make out that I'm being an absolute saint. Even though I've cut down a lot over the past few years, I probably still buy too many clothes. However, I think it's a small win when I can buy something pre-loved rather than going out and buying something brand new. It means that thing didn't have to be manufactured again, slightly reducing all the bad things that inevitably come with a lot of clothing manufacturing. And when you buy something of quality, you know you'll be able to sell it on as well if you ever get tired of it. I have no doubt that some of my vintage items have been owned by many other people and will be passed on to many more at some point in their life. Unless it's something really niche, I feel like there's something out there for everyone on the second-hand market. And so there's a bunch of reasons why I have so many old clothes in my rotation. I'd love to know if any of you guys think the same way, or do you much prefer to buy new? If so, what's stopping you from buying vintage? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ta-ra.